Welcome to the first webinar in the 2024 Earth Science Week webinar series celebrating Earth science everywhere. Today's presenters will speak about how Earth observations are taken and used to monitor conditions around the world, as well as ways to bring this data into classrooms to introduce students to sustainability issues. Our first presenter, Corena Pincham, will speak about technologies used to make Earth observations and the importance of using this data and monitoring progress toward the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Corena Pincham, and I am the Executive Director of the Earth Observations for Sustainable Development Goals initiative. Today, you will learn about Earth observations data and how our initiative is organized to share it in support of global sustainable development. So what exactly is Earth observations, or EO? This is information about the physical, chemical, and biological features of the Earth, which we get from above the Earth as well as on it and below it. You can think about general Earth science data as being an equivalent. So this comprises numerical measurements, satellite and aerial imagery, and data that comes from radar, sonar, LiDAR, and thermal sensors. With EO data, we can see weather patterns across the Earth. We can understand trends in biodiversity populations and growth. We can see concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We can understand the effects of natural disasters upon landscapes. We can analyze the amount of natural resources within a region. And we can monitor where human populations and critical infrastructure are at. A satellite is anything that orbits a planet, star, or moon. So, for example, our moon is a satellite of the Earth. And we build satellites that are sent out into the solar system and beyond to learn about outer space. And then there are also satellites built to orbit around our planet, facing the Earth. These special spacecraft can tell us information about the Earth's condition. All man-made satellites are constructed with an antenna and power source, but Earth-observing satellites also contain cameras and sensors to take scientific measurements. These remotely sensed measurements help us understand our planet's dynamics. How do satellites scan the right parts of the Earth? When they are launched on rockets hundreds of miles into space, they are set on paths to revolve within the Earth's gravitational field. If a satellite orbits from west to east around the equator, called geostationary orbit, the satellite will always send back information about the one specific area of the Earth it is facing, because it is rotating at the same rate as the Earth from west to east. If a satellite orbits from north to south at the same distance, known as polar orbit, it will make several passes each day around the globe opposite of its rotation. This provides us information about more of the Earth's surface area with larger strips of data, but both orbits allow for passes that take between 90 and 200 minutes. Satellites are not our only source of EO data. Sometimes we need systems on the ground to help confirm accurate location of what we're trying to analyze. So this is the basis for GPS. When you go on the Maps app on your phone or on your computer to look up a location, that data comes from orbiting satellites sending radio signals which are picked up by stations on the ground, and they are then received by our devices. So GPS satellite networks help us navigate the Earth, and those same networks help us get images of larger portions of the Earth. Here are a few other ground collection methods that happen on the surface. We've been able to take pictures from the sky since the late 19th century when the first aircraft were developed. We not only rely on planes that contain cameras, but we can also use small-scale drones to photograph the Earth. Radar systems use radio waves to detect the location and motion of weather systems. The colorful weather maps that you'll see on the news or online are based on radar visualizations of precipitation and cloud cover in the atmosphere. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, uses lasers pointed at particular objects to measure the amount of time it takes for the reflected light to return to the receiver. This is helpful for making high-resolution and 3D maps of land, the ocean floor, forest conditions, air pollution, and more, depending on if the LiDAR sensors are part of ground, aerial, or satellite systems. Lastly, sonar, which stands for Sound Navigation and Ranging, uses sound waves to measure distances and detect marine life. This is helpful for understanding the health and behavior of fish populations, for example, and is another way that we're able to map out the ocean floor. How do we get EO data? A main source of global data and imagery comes from space agencies, who are the primary owners of satellite systems. For example, NASA, the Japanese space agency JAXA, and the European Space Agency ESA all gather and share out environmental info freely in large quantities. There are also companies that build their own satellites and share high-resolution EO images to government and business customers. And of course, we rely on government agencies and academic research centers that collect Earth data on regional and national levels, such as the U.S. Geological Survey and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So let's go over what some of this data actually looks like. Both of these images were taken with satellites. The left side shows a composite image of city lights at nighttime across North and South America. It took 6 months worth of polar orbiting to generate this image in 2012. From this image, we can see where human populations are across the continents and where the most economic activity happens. The right side shows an aerial view of Lake Erie between Michigan, Ohio, and Canada in 2023, processed to highlight the colors of phytoplankton, sediment, and other organic matter in the water. This comes from a satellite called PACE that has a special instrument which can measure wavelengths of light at very fine resolutions. So this is helpful for understanding how freshwater and saltwater ecosystems change over time. Here are examples of the kinds of digital maps that can be generated with EO data. At the top is a map of the diverse landscapes of the United States. It shows where continental bodies of water are at, the regions where urban areas are located, how much land is used for agriculture, and types of mountainous and forested terrain. Land cover maps like this help us understand how land should be managed to balance both the well-being of human settlements and natural habitats. This map gets updated by the U.S. Geological Survey every few years, and you can take a closer look at the data it's comprised of online. The bottom map shows a data layer of fires detected over a month this summer in Africa and South America, over top data showing continental forests. It's important to assess this kind of data together because it shows the regions with the most vulnerability to human-caused fires and increased wildfire events from climate change. Wildfire data also illuminates greenhouse gas emission measurements, which is critical for understanding atmospheric conditions as well as regional human health. So how exactly does this EO data help us? It is very important for us to assess as a planet in order to tackle our global challenges. First, let's talk about a few key words. Science diplomacy. This is when people from different countries agree to share scientific information to solve issues together in formal ways. A more basic form of this is the concept of knowledge sharing, which is when information and ideas are exchanged between communities. It's important for us to work together to achieve shared goals and solve common problems like global health crises, developing new innovative technologies, exploring further into space, and tackling climate change. So many different individuals and groups collaborate to share ideas and tools that can help communities deal with environmental changes like rising temperatures water scarcity, and wildlife conservation. A really good example of science knowledge sharing is if a community in one part of the world that has dealt with flooding events on a regular basis, they have the knowledge that they can share with another community that might newly be experiencing frequent floods. They can provide technical assistance to help that community improve their weather information in order to be able to respond to flood disasters better. In 2015, 193 member countries of the United Nations agreed to support the SDG agenda. These are 17 specific goals to improve global outcomes by the year 2030. And these countries report back to the UN on a regular basis on the progress that they are making on the goals. Each Sustainable Development Goal, or SDG, is comprised of smaller elements that help us find and apply multiple solutions to them. And one of those solutions can be Earth observation data. For example, Goal 1 is to end global poverty, but we can get a little bit more specific about what that means with its target 1.5, which is to reduce the exposure of poorer populations to economic, social, and environmental shocks and disasters. So, what exactly is sustainable development? This is the effort to improve the living conditions and resources available to current societies in a way that is mindful of generations to come. So, this is kind of a three-pronged concept. One, we talk about human well-being, we talk about economic growth, and environmental health. So, challenges such as broadening access to food and housing, earth-friendly production of goods, access to education and job opportunities globally, public health outcomes, they're all part of sustainable development. And specifically, Earth observation data can help us answer questions such as how can we best protect animal habitats and land, forest, and water ecosystems? How can people interact with their natural surroundings in healthier ways? And how can water and land resources be better managed? This is where EO for SDG comes in. So NASA is a part of the Group on Earth Observations, which is an international forum of countries and organizations that share Earth research and knowledge to care for the planet. This is a form of science diplomacy. In 2016, after the SDG agenda was established, the EO for SDG initiative was created as a way for members of GEO to support the SDG agenda, and it was founded by representatives from the US and Japan space agencies. So our purpose is to promote the use of Earth observations, both data from ground sensors and orbiting satellites, to enable the societal benefits through the achievement of the SDGs. What exactly do we do? We allow for science and technology professionals to share how Earth observations is being used across the world to reveal environmental trends. We help make connections between countries in need and the experts who can help them use EO data to monitor SDG conditions. We highlight the activities of our member organizations in this space. We work with UN agencies, local governments, and other types of groups to promote the use of EO data and mapping technologies. We've also funded some research projects in order to allow global communities to access new tools for SDG monitoring and reporting. And we also make an effort to share out learning resources on what EO is for the people that need it. So in summary, we've explored the technology behind Earth observations and how we use it to help us understand environmental processes. We've drawn connections from it to sustainable development and how people gather to share science knowledge. We've talked about how EO for SDG organizes to help countries access and use EO data on their journeys to care for the environment and achieve the SDGs. And now you'll hear about how Earth observation data has been effective for real-world issues for global ecosystems.
Our next speaker, Laura Rogers, will talk about how NASA collects Earth observation data and the specific data sets that are used to monitor progress toward SDG 15, Life on Land.
Hi, I'm Laura Rogers from NASA Langley. Did you know NASA has more than 24 instruments in space observing our planet? These instruments monitor the entire globe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These incredible instruments allow us to see the unseen for a holistic view of our planet. One incredible aspect of our unique perspective from space is the lack of borders. We can see how oceans swirl, storms evolve, clouds come and go, and forests and plants change with the season. It's this information taken together that allows us to understand the interconnections between the precipitation cycles, droughts in agriculture, or rising temperatures, oceans, and increasingly severe storms. The program I work for at NASA is called the Ecological Conservation Program, and I specifically work in the terrestrial ecology. This program supports both SDG 14 and 15, but today I'll speak on two projects most closely aligned with SDG 15, Life on Land. As I mentioned earlier, NASA satellites allow us to see the unseen. We often use this knowledge to work with partners around the globe to support decisions and protect natural resources. Two of our partners have worked tirelessly to protect biodiversity and species of critical importance. The first is working with the Wildlife Conservation Society, or WCS, to preserve tiger landscapes, an important step to allow these beautiful creatures to thrive. The second is working with the Jane Goodall Institute. This program is also protecting critical habitat, but for our nearest relative, the chimpanzee. The global wild tiger population has suffered a devastating decline in just over a century, losing more than 97% of its historic range. In 2010, the population reached an all-time low of approximately 3,200 individuals, sparking action to protect tiger conservation landscapes, requiring objective, range-wide monitoring. WCS, in conjunction with NASA, created an integrated habitat modeling system to measure and monitor changes in tiger habitat. Much of this is due to human activity and changing environmental conditions. The tool integrates remotely sensed estimates of habitat structure, using, again, NASA satellites and some from Europe, and human footprint. With this information at their fingertips, conservationists found that 226 sites could be restored for tiger populations. These are areas that could host tigers, but currently don't. With sufficient prey and connectivity to existing tiger habitats, the study estimates that it could allow for tiger populations to increase by 50%. For decades, satellites have measured dramatic changes in the world's forests. These eyes in the sky provide timely information on environmental change and human activity in forests, especially in remote ones. The Jane Goodall Institute has been working with NASA in using earth science satellite imagery and data in its chimpanzee and forest conservation efforts in Africa, particularly in the Gombe region. One of the primary motivators behind the Jane Goodall Institute is the power of storytelling. Jane herself has always believed using images to tell the story will empower people to choose and make the best decision. The observations and analyses from above aid Goodall's Sakare program, a community-led approach to conserving the environment while improving and enriching the lives of people who live nearby. Such efforts are crucial to protecting the planet's biodiversity and achieving sustainable human development of the landscape. Here I am showing you the culmination of work of decades. Deep within Africa, Jane Goodall has been working to demonstrate the impact of the current chimpanzee range versus the past. With less suitable habitat, chimpanzees have less available food and fewer potential mates, leading to population decline. Images in 2005 clearly show forest degradation due to logging and human activity. These images are critical to helping people to understand how human activity, resource availability, and biodiversity are connected. By 2015, a distinct change can be seen as the community works together to develop approaches to change their deforestation practices and as protected areas for chimpanzee habitat become more prevalent. Again, this is Jane Goodall's vision of hope and bringing the community together to understand their impacts. These are just two brief examples to give you a glimpse of how NASA is working with partners to support and improve life on land. We work to see the unseen and share this interconnected knowledge. These two examples also demonstrate the need to work together. Humans, biodiversity, and the resources provided by our planet are all connected, and we must understand each for us all to thrive. Thank you for listening to my brief overview on how NASA Earth observations are used to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I look forward to hearing any questions and connecting with all of you.
Our next speaker, Dr. Lola Fatoyinbo, will discuss how Earth observation data is used to monitor conditions in mangroves and how this work relates to a number of sustainable development goals.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Lola Fatoyinbo and I'm a research scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and I work in the Biospheric Sciences Laboratory. And today I'll be talking to you about my work focused on mapping and monitoring mangrove ecosystems using satellite data in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. So mangroves are these groups of trees that grow in tropical and subtropical regions worldwide in areas where the land meets sea, which we call the intertidal zone. And they're really characterized by these intricate above ground root systems that you can see in this picture in the back left or in the picture on the right. These above ground roots allow them to grow in standing water without falling over. They also kind of serve as snorkels that allow them to breathe air and get oxygen into the system. And they also allow them to excrete salt because oftentimes mangroves are growing in actually salty or brackish water. Mangroves are really important habitat for both terrestrial and aquatic species. So in a mangrove you can find birds, monkeys, in some areas even tigers above the ground. And then in the water you can find, like I show here in this picture in the middle that I took in the Florida Everglades, crocodiles, alligators, many fish and crustaceans as well. And in fact, they're really important nursery habitat for many, many fish species. And it's estimated that about 3,000 fish species live in mangroves. And up to 70% of commercial fish and shrimp spend some time in a mangrove. Mangroves also provide numerous what we call ecosystem services, which are essentially the benefits that people derive from mangroves. So in this infographic right here, for example, I'm showing you some of the services that mangroves are really well known for. These range from, supporting people's livelihood, providing wood for timber or for charcoal production, for example. They're very important as a tourism location with lots of people who really enjoy mangrove-related attractions. They're also really important for coastal protection. In fact, mangroves, because of their structure and their roots, are able to protect inland areas from a lot of the effects of storms, hurricanes, or tidal waves. And then finally, they're also really important for climate regulation. And for example, mangroves have been shown to store very high amounts of carbon, both in the trees and also in the soil below them. And on top of that, they also constantly are taking up large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which they then store in their trunks, in their roots, in their leaves, and also in the soil. However, despite their ecological and economic importance, mangroves are also really vulnerable and have been highly disturbed. And it's actually estimated that about 50 to 60% of the original mangrove area has been lost in just the past 60 years. And this is primarily due to developments such as aquaculture, agriculture, urban and coastal development, and then the diversion of fresh water, which essentially leads these mangroves to dry out. So to show an example, here I'm showing a time series of satellite data from the Landsat sensors that was taken from 1994 up to 2017 that really shows the dramatic loss of mangroves in an area in Indonesia called Gorontalo. And here what we're seeing is how these mangroves were converted from being healthy mangrove ecosystems to aquaculture ponds. And so prior to the access to Earth observations and satellite imagery, we really didn't know what the extent of mangrove deforestation was, and we only had very limited information. So now that we have access to a lot more satellite data, we can do a much better job at actually monitoring these systems and understanding where they are, where they're being lost, and also their importance. And so because of all of these ecosystem services that mangroves provide, they are actually contributing to many of the SDGs and are a really important part in many of the sustainable development goals. So here I have some examples showing that mangroves are an important contributor and play an important part in SDGs like 1, no poverty, or SDG 2, zero hunger, and of course today we'll be talking about SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. So mangroves are under the clean water SDG because they actually contribute to cleaner water in multiple ways. Because they have these complex root systems, they're able to filter nitrates, phosphates, heavy metals out of the water. They also trap sediment that is flowing downstream, which allows the water to become cleaner because of all the sediment that they're able to trap in it. And then because they're these coastline stabilizers and they're able to protect the coastline from storms that are coming from the ocean side, they're also reducing damage to these coastlines that comes from hurricanes or storms or large waves, also increasing clean water. So mangroves are really important for SDG 6 clean water and sanitation because they can actually be used as an indicator for the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, which is the goal of SDG 6. So essentially what this means is that if we have healthy mangroves, we have healthy ecosystems, that is an indicator that tells us that there is a healthy water supply in that region. And so that's why coastal vegetation and forests such as salt marshes, wetlands, and mangroves are really important indicators for this SDG. So our area of focus has primarily been global, and this is because we have access to this amazing satellite imagery that allows us to really do analyses and produce data sets and maps that are useful for end users for real-world decisions on a global scale. We also have more regional focus areas, and on my team we're really focused and interested in working in West Africa, an area that has a lot of mangroves. And so on the bottom here I'm showing you an example of a map that we produced by working with end users in West Africa, in Nigeria specifically, where we produced a map of all of the coastal vegetation for the coastal states in Nigeria. And as I mentioned, a lot of the work that we do is really in collaboration with partners on the ground. So some of our studies have a global outlook, and many of them have really a more regional focus, where we produce data sets and maps that are useful for reporting on SDGs, for example, on a countrywide basis. So as part of this, we've worked with all of these different institutions that I'm highlighting here, some that are, for example, conservation agencies. We have UN agencies, or even small businesses that are trying to do their part in improving the ecological condition of their region. So how do we actually study mangroves? We study mangroves from a variety of aspects and a variety of themes. So we actually do a lot of field work. So here I'm highlighting some of the examples of us going into the field, taking our equipment, making measurements in the field. And this is really important because we need this field data to compare to maybe some of the satellite imagery and the satellite data that we use. And here I'm showing an example of us working in the field in the country of Benin, where we were collaborating with the government and conservation agencies on trying to do a better job at mapping mangrove extent, so understanding where the mangroves are, but also understanding how many of these mangroves have been lost over time and how much carbon is stored in the mangroves in the soil. So in that bottom right image, for example, you're seeing us taking a soil core, trying to get measurements of how much carbon has been stored in the soil, which gives us an indication of how much would also be emitted if this area was destroyed. But working in the field in a mangrove is really, really hard. You know, those same things that I mentioned earlier that make them really special is also the same thing that can sometimes make them very horrible to work in when you're in the field. You can see that from this image where we have some of the most giant mangroves in the world. This is an image taken in Gabon in Central Africa. You know, when you see this, you just realize that it's really impossible to move through them. Like, how do you deal with this? You have to go over the roots or you have to go under the roots. You have to deal with tides. There's lots of mosquitoes. You're dealing with animals. It's hot. It's a really, really exhausting environment to work in. And it's just very, very difficult. So that's why in many places there haven't been as many studies in mangrove forest as in other ecosystems. So this is where the power of remote sensing and using satellite imagery really comes in. So as I mentioned, we do go into the field, but we also work a lot in the lab. And here I'm highlighting some pictures where you really see us working in person with people and also doing our analysis on satellite imagery. And being able to have access to all the satellite imagery is hugely beneficial, especially when you're working in a difficult environment like a mangrove forest. And really what we do when we're working with these different systems and end users is that we have access to multiple sensors and multiple avenues of doing the analysis. So here, for example, I'm showing you an area in Benin, a mangrove forest, which has a lot of really patchy areas. So you might be looking at this area with a Landsat image, Landsat being a satellite that has pixels that are at 30-meter resolution. So the smallest resolution that you could see would be 30 meters. And we work with data that goes all the way to 1-meter resolution and sometimes even have access to drones that can collect imagery at maybe 3 centimeters resolution. And really the important part here is that depending on the application that you have, depending on what you're trying to report on, you have access to different types of data sets and different satellite data that can give you the answer to the question you're trying to address. So now I'm going to highlight some examples of the type of research that we've done that is in support of Sustainable Development Goals. So one data set that we've produced that's been really useful is to understand and map what the global drivers of mangrove loss are. So what are the global causes that are leading to the deforestation or degradation of mangrove forests worldwide? So here we looked at data from the Landsat satellites, and we looked at all of the Landsat data that we could find covering all mangrove areas worldwide between 2000 and 2016 and analyzed where those mangroves had been lost. And then we also tried to understand what the mangroves were converted to once they had been lost. And we found that there were 5 main causes or drivers of loss worldwide. One being erosion, another one commodities like aquaculture and agriculture, and then there are extreme events. These include drought or cyclones or hurricanes. And then there's what we call non-productive conversion, which is essentially deforestation or cutting of mangroves, but not to transform them into something else like aquaculture, but just deforestation. And then finally, in some areas, you might have a combination of multiple factors where you have a coastal squeeze. So you might have erosion or tidal surges or sea level rise happening on the seaward side, coupled with commodities or deforestation happening on the landward side, meaning that mangroves are essentially being squeezed from both sides. And so one of the other really important results that came out of the study that has been really useful as well is to find that mangrove deforestation rates have actually decreased over time since the early 2000s. So there has been a stark decrease in mangrove deforestation rates worldwide due to human activities. And most of the losses that have happened in that time are actually concentrated in just 6 countries, most of which are in Southeast Asia. So having this information on what the main drivers or causes are of loss is a really important indicator, also especially for SDGs. And then also knowing where those losses are happening and why is also a really important indicator that can be then used for any type of management intervention. Another product we produced is a global map of mangrove height and carbon stocks. This is also based on satellite data from NASA, and actually having access to height and carbon stocks can also be used as important indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. We also use the satellite data to do things like map invasive species. So here I'm showing an example of us mapping an invasive mangrove species called nipa palm in Nigeria, where there's a combination of deforestation and pollution from oil spills that is leading the mangroves to be stressed and allowing this nipa palm to encroach into endemic mangrove areas. And what we found is that actually in certain areas, this palm has increased by almost 1,000% in certain areas in just a few years. And so finally, I just wanted to highlight, I hope that you've now understood that mangroves are really important ecosystems and that we can produce many products, maps, indicators that are important, not just for science, but also to support the Sustainable Development Goals. I also wanted to highlight that all of the data that we produce and these maps that we produce are available. And here I'm showing a web mapping app that we've developed, for example, to look at the height and biomass maps that I just showed you. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Now let's look at some educational resources developed for Earth Science Week by the American Geosciences Institute in partnership with Earth Observations for the SDGs. These resources are meant to introduce K-12 students to the Sustainable Development Goals and how they relate to Earth observation data. Every year for Earth Science Week, the American Geosciences Institute creates a calendar of Earth science activities, with each month highlighting an activity from a different Earth Science Week partner. For the 2024-2025 calendar, there are a range of activities that celebrate the theme of Earth science everywhere. However, every activity within the calendar links to Sustainable Development Goals that relate to the concepts covered in that activity. Because it is a school year calendar, it starts with the month of August, and the activity for August 2024 was written in partnership with EO4SDG, as well as the Earth Science Information Partners, to highlight the Globe Observer app and its role in recording Earth observation data. The Globe Observer app is a participatory science app, meaning anyone can use it to collect data. That data is then reported to NASA and can be used for research studies, publications, and environmental monitoring. Specifically, the activity from the calendar has students using land cover portion of the Globe Observer app, in which they can document land cover and land use changes to see these on a very small scale. Earth observation data of land cover and land use is typically taken by satellites. Images cover a very large area at a very wide scale, meaning that subtle changes or transitions between land cover areas can be overlooked. The Globe Observer app allows students or anyone who's interested to make observations of a small area that helps fill in the gaps of Earth observation data from satellites by filling in fine details. The second part of this activity has students relate the data they collect to the Sustainable Development Report, which is an interactive website looking at all of the SDGs and countries around the world and their progress toward them. By clicking on a country, you can see their progress toward each goal, with greens indicating the goal has been achieved, yellows and oranges indicating that there is moderate progress, and red indicating that a lot of work needs to be done toward that goal. This is both quantitative and qualitative, as you can see from the graph, as well as the color coding. So looking at an SDG that relates to land cover, let's go with SDG 15, Life on Land. So when students click on SDG 15, they can see the map change to see the progress toward that specific goal. And not only that, they can see progress toward the individual indicators, which are listed here. Looking at the official United Nations Sustainable Development Goal page, we can see the targets and indicators on here defined as actionable steps toward the SDGs. However, on the Sustainable Development Report map, these are put into more common language that students would be able to better relate to. So by clicking on one of the indicators, you can see again the map changes to show how that indicator is currently being met by various countries. By clicking on a country, you can see not only the progress toward that goal, but the general trend in progress. Or you can click on the trend button to see the entire map change to see what the trend is in the work being done toward a specific SDG. So let's just look at another example real quick to see the differences. So here with SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, we see a lot more greens and oranges and yellows than we did with SDG 15, but can still look through the targets and indicators similarly in order to see the progress made toward the individual actionable steps that could relate to earth science concepts. Using an activity like this to introduce your students to the SDGs could then allow for exploration of other SDGs in which they're interested, or making connections to additional earth science concepts throughout the year. We also helped in the creation of this curated collection on Earth observation data and how it relates to the SDGs, with a lot of links for lesson plans, educator resources, as well as ways to get Earth observation data. So, for example, many of you might use the NASA Earth Observatory. And so this has very current stories and data and satellite images to use in your lesson plans to talk about a number of different earth science concepts and relate them to what's going on in the world that could easily be relatable to how this data can be used to track and monitor progress toward the SDGs. Within this collection, we also have some training materials on incorporating the SDGs and, of course, a link to the Sustainable Development Report that I talked about earlier. Lastly, I would like to highlight the resources we have on our new Geoscience for Sustainability website. We have a lot of educator resources, such as Education for Sustainable Development kits, which connect to the topics of water, energy, consumption, and climate. We also have case studies based on the Geoscience in Action report from the American Geophysical Union and UNESCO, which highlights the work of geoscientists as it relates to the SDGs. So we have K through 8 lessons on soil, as well as conservation of geoheritage sites, and we have high school lessons on water quality and carbon sequestration. And lastly, we are starting a new program called the Sustainability Ambassador, where educators can sign up to share resources and get more resources on sustainability and the SDGs and how to use them in the classroom. So we're hoping to build this network to have a number of teachers involved in talking about the resources that they use in order to get best practices for the classroom. Please let us know if you have any questions on the resources that we shared today. We hope you find them useful in introducing the Sustainable Development Goals and giving real-world context to earth science concepts. Our final presenter, Tracy Ostrom, will talk about a curriculum that connects the Sustainable Development Goals to microplastics.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to tell you today about our experience in putting together a microplastic investigation in the K-12 education environment So this is all about learners investigating microplastics and then self-reporting what they learned about this investigation. My name is Tracy Ostrom. I'm from the University of California, Berkeley. A little bit more about me. I spent my first 13 years in professional environment as an environmental scientist. With various firms. And at the end of that tenure, I switched over and received my teaching credential in biology and chemistry and spent the next 17 years as a high school biology, chemistry, and environmental science teacher. And the last 8 years, once I retired from the classroom, I have been a K-12 science educator support provider with the Department of Chemistry at UC Berkeley. And our work focuses on supporting educators in using hands-on environmental science to support their science content learning through a program called GLOBE. GLOBE stands for Global Learning and Observation to Benefit the Environment. I am also a PhD candidate in science and agriculture education at UC Davis Graduate School of Ed. So that's me in a little bit of a nutshell. And let's get on to what we're here to learn about, and that's microplastic investigation. So the microplastic protocol to perform the investigation was created by scientists in Italy and Australia. And so what we've done is we've taken this microplastic protocol and really packaged it for educators in the US. So we start out with a hook of a sink or float activity where students start thinking about how microplastics behave in surface waters. And on day 2, we provide some background information about microplastics and how microplastics are different than plastics you may see, like water bottles and forks and spoons in waters. So it talks a little bit more specific about microplastics. On day 3, there is an opportunity for students to investigate water quality. And so this is where the GLOBE program comes in, where students take their surface water samples that they believe have microplastics, but they're not sure yet. And they do a number of water quality analysis on those on those water samples, including pH, temperature, transparency, alkalinity, dissolved oxygen, nitrates, phosphates, etc. So they really get a feel for, what the water quality is of those water samples. And day 4 is the microplastics lab, which is probably the most exciting for our educators and our learners. And this is where they'll take their water samples and they'll run them through a filtration system that has a 0.45 or 0.46 micron filter paper in there. And then they'll take that filter paper out and look at it underneath the microscope and see what kind of microplastics there are, if there are microplastics. And the last day of this program is really having the students putting it all together and demonstrating what they've learned, how their learning has progressed. So it's 5 days. It doesn't need to be 5 days in a row. It could be every Friday, it could be Monday, it could be a couple days one week, a couple days another week. But it basically packages the investigation so it's more manageable for our educators to deliver the package. So let's start with this first day, which is the hook. I like to call the hook, Sink or Float Lab. All of these activities each day can be done within a class period. So we tried to organize what the students were doing so that they could start and finish in one class period. And we timed it for about 45 minutes. So the idea is that you have small teams, you have different each team has a cup of water. It can be just regular tap water, or it could be the surface water that you're going to be testing microplastics in. And basically you give them a number of samples of plastics, and each sample of plastic has a different type of recycle number on it. And there's a protocol in which they take the plastic with tweezers, the plastic sample, and they put it about 2 centimeters underneath the surface of the water, and they make a determination. Is it going to sink? Is it going to float? Is it going to stay the same? And so there's a little bit of claims that they make, and then observations, and then the reporting piece. And what I encourage our educators to do is to record what each group does. And so there's an opportunity to determine whether or not everybody's getting consistent results, or are the results different. And it also gives them an opportunity, based on these results from each group, is to kind of develop these I wonder questions, or what we call research questions, about how microplastics may behave in water. So this is a great hook activity. It's very simple to do. It's pretty fast. And it really starts kind of setting the pace of what in the heck we're going to be doing in this investigation. On day 2, it's all about content delivery, tying it into the science content. Maybe it's an ecosystem science contact. Maybe it's an earth science phenomena that's being investigated. Maybe it's a chemistry, water quality, pH kind of investigation. So there's lots of ways to tie this microplastic investigation into the science content area. And we provide some opportunities of making those connections to our educators. The really key part of this is for our learners to be able to make connections to their community, their environment, because water samples can come from a local creek, a lake, a pond, storm drain water. So there's lots of opportunities to collect surface waters for the investigation. We really want it to be able to apply to their communities and their understanding of what's going on in their own environment. And the goal of all this, obviously, is to have our learners develop questions that can be answered by doing a microplastics lab. On day 3, this is where Globe comes in, and we have our students actually conduct water quality testing. And as you can see here, we have a group of students who are working outside doing their water quality testing. But more exciting to me is this idea of taking a look at the data. What's the story? We have different groups out there doing different, all the same tests, but with their own water samples. And it's really interesting. It's like, well, why aren't we all getting the same values kind of stuff? And are there any trends that we see? And could we model this particular step with other water samples? So as I said before, this is some of the parameters that we're testing in our water quality. So we kind of get a picture of the type of surface water that we're working with. Yeah, so here's the fun part, right? Not that the other stuff isn't fun, but this is kind of like what we're all waiting for, this idea of the microplastics lab. And so to make a long story short, basically we're taking 500 milliliters of sample water, and we're running it through a filtration system with an upper chamber, lower chamber, and a piece of filter paper that's no larger than 0.47 microns. In the filter paper, and the water really needs to be fairly clean. Water that's heavy in sediment is going to clog up that filter paper immediately. It's going to be really hard to get the water through. But it takes about 20 minutes. Usually what we do is we show the students how to set up the filtration system the day before. So when they come into class, they're ready to go. And once they have their water filtered through their chamber, they'll look at it, and like I said, underneath a microscope. This takes about 20 to 30 minutes depending on the patience of the students. But what we offer is a dichotomous key kind of guideline for them to try to get a general identification of the type of microplastic that they may be seeing. And then there's a whole larger guide for them to try to maybe pinpoint down a potential source of those microplastics that they're identifying on their filter paper. And like I said, that we do this to really kind of tie it into their learning. So there's a lot of hands-on science going on. This is a photograph of one of our students who took a picture through the microscope at what they were looking at. And you can see there's a lot of brown algae spots, but you can clearly see the samples of microplastics in this particular view. We really kind of teach them scientific methods in terms of skills of how to set up the filtration system, how to look at a microscope and find things. And for the younger folks, what we ask them to do is to draw what they see, because a lot of times that's as far as they can get. So even the fifth graders can draw what they see and kind of ask questions. I wonder if what I'm looking at is a microplastic, or if it's something else that I'm looking at. So it keeps students engaged throughout the process, throughout the class period. And last but not least, we ask them to kind of share their learning story. And this could take on many different forms. We offer a template for a PowerPoint, but really it's up to the educator and the what he or she wants to do in the classroom with their students. It could be a presentation, it could be a paper, it could be simply an exit ticket, something like that, to really understand how students are kind of developing their own learning, their own awareness of microplastics, and possibly offering some next steps as to how they can impact their community in terms of plastics in surface waters. So thank you very much for your time and energy. Like I said, this is a 5-day microplastics investigation pacing guide. It's based on protocols and field guides. And I need to give credit to our scientific team at Deakin University in Australia and Globitalia. And if you have any questions, my contact information is provided on this slide, and I'm happy to talk to you further. We have also uploaded a link for the 5-day pacing guide, along with an equipment list for folks who want to investigate this a little bit further with their learners. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for attending today's Earth Science Week webinar, and thank you again to all of our presenters. Immediately following this presentation, the recording will be available on the Earth Science Week playlist of the American Geosciences Institute YouTube channel. Please join us for the rest of the webinars in this series as we continue to celebrate the 2024 Earth Science Week theme, Earth Science Everywhere.